Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Manya Whitaker, Executive Vice President and Chief of Staff, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you all to the Block 7 First Monday. Oh, yeah, okay. We like that. All right. So clearly you're rested and rejuvenated from spring break. And so now it's time to turn our attention back to the critical issues of our time that a liberal arts education prepares us to address, and that includes climate change. As part of her vision and strategic priorities, President Richardson has challenged us to integrate environmental stewardship into our day-to-day lives, as we do with anti-racism, and as we've started to do with mental health and well-being. Please join me in welcoming President Richardson to share more about her vision of sustainability that led us here together today for this First Monday event. President Richardson.
Welcome back, everyone. It's great to see you. I hope you took some, I'm sure, much needed time off and had some rest and relaxation over this break. Did you do that? Yeah? Great. And I'm thrilled to see so many of you here today for this important First Monday. As Professor and Chief of Staff and Executive Vice President Manya Whitaker stated in the introduction to today's event, climate change, sustainability, and continuing our leadership role in that area is an important priority for me and for us as a college. And that is why I'm so thrilled that Bryan Alexander was able to join us today. His work focuses on the climate crisis and on how colleges and universities can be powerful forces for change. This is something that we already know at CC. We already know how important our work can be and how important you, all of you here in the audience, all of our students, how important your work in this area will be. And you're already doing such incredible work in this area for which I am so proud. And the reason Bryan is here today is because we ended up meeting at a place called the Council of Independent Colleges, and there was a president's convening, and he and I happened to be on a panel together. And it was there that I learned about this amazing book, which I hope all of you will get after this event, because Bryan Alexander will be signing these books. And as we presented on the panel together, I learned from him so much that he will talk about today, about the important work that we, as members of Colorado College's community, can do to help with the climate crisis. So Bryan is an internationally known futurist, researcher, writer, speaker, consultant, and teacher. He is a senior scholar at Georgetown University and teaches graduate seminars in their Learning, Design, and Technology program. His books include the award-winning Academia Next, The Futures of Higher Ed, and I'm especially excited about this book that I already told you about that just came out. It is hot off the presses. And this book explores how climate change will fundamentally reshape higher education. And again, as I've stated already, the reason I wanted Bryan to come here to speak with us today is I know that Colorado College will continue its leadership role in this space. And the book, Universities on Fire, has been described as urgent and necessary, and as a compelling account of the intersection of academia and climate change. And as I mentioned, there will be a book signing after this event. So Bryan completed his PhD in English language and literature at the University of Michigan. He taught literature, writing, and multimedia and information technology studies at Centenary College. He also worked with the National Institute for Technology in Liberal Education. And I just learned from Bryan today that perhaps he'll be writing his next book on artificial intelligence. Bryan speaks widely and publishes frequently, with articles appearing in national media, including the Atlantic Monthly and Inside Higher Ed. He has also been interviewed by and featured in The Washington Post, MSNBC, The Wall Street Journal, NPR, The Atlantic Monthly, among many others. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Bryan Alexander.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, President Richardson, for that extremely kind introduction. I'm especially glad to be here because, well, for a long time, I worked with a nonprofit that worked with small colleges across the US, including the West Coast, the Midwest, the Southeast, the Northeast. And you can see Colorado College just standing there as the one in the Rocky Mountains that I hadn't been to. So today I was wandering around campus, accosting totally surprised students and trying to figure out what this is like. It's a delight to be here. But also for my new work, talking about climate change, what you all are doing here is in advance of what most of higher education is doing. So you should feel excited and thrilled and pointed in a good direction. What a futurist does, everyone has different ideas. Often the top right, people think I have a crystal ball. I do, actually. And I have a collection of magic 8-balls that I use. And people on the left think I have occult powers. I'll tell you one example of that in a bit. But what I really do is I try to help people think more clearly, more creatively, and more strategically about the future. So I do a lot of research for this. And that involves a lot of practice. I'll tell you about that later if you're curious. But my most recent book, which came out in 2019, 2020, looked at the next generation of American higher education, trying to figure out where it might be. And here's where the occult powers come in. On page 23, I asked the audience to imagine what would happen if a pandemic struck the world. Just hypothetically, what would happen, if it's a global pandemic, and it may be the size of the 1919 Great Influenza, how would that change teaching online? What would that do to student athletics and so on? And no one paid attention to this page until about 3 years ago. And then I got the "what dark powers are you in league with, Alexander" kind of speech. So after all of that, I decided to take a look further ahead at where higher education was going worldwide and to look at the rest of the century. And I found that climate change was a subject that just wasn't on the radar, that people weren't talking about very much. So I dove into this, and the more I researched it, the bigger the problem got. Which led me to ask a couple of research questions. And some of you have done this in your own work as students. The first was, how could climate change impact higher education all across the board, from individual students, staff, and faculty globally? And then, in some ways more importantly, what does academia have to offer the rest of the world as civilization grapples with a developing climate crisis? And that's what I try to answer in this book. So to begin with, think about that impact. Think about how campuses, colleges, and universities may be hit by climate change. And some of the ways are pretty obvious. You've probably seen maps like this before, taking a look at sea level rise. And if you just run your eye along the coastline here, you can see that Florida is just gone, which is kind of not a surprise in many ways. But think of all the campuses there. I'll come back to that. Look at the Northeast. Look at all the campuses all around Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and then look at the inland sea inside of Louisiana. This is just one sample of possible impacts. And if you look around the world, you can look at, say, southern India or Bangladesh, which have a lot of population and a lot of colleges and universities right in the Indian Ocean. This is one potential impact. I'll give you an example from Miami. How many of you have been to Miami? Have you experienced daylight flooding there yet? This is when it's a beautiful day like today and the city will just flood because it's at sea level and it's built on limestone. And they haven't really protected themselves against flooding very well. So on a nice day, you'll just see water rise up on streets. Think about the colleges there. Here are just a few that are within a few blocks of the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, here are those that are on the beach. So you have to wonder, if you're a university student, a president, a professor, one of these, what do you do next? I mean, do you think about raising your buildings up on pylons so the water can rush underneath? Do you think about building a seawall in front of it? Do you think about moving? People have said that climate change is in part where you get too much precipitation in the wrong places and too little precipitation in the wrong places. So the opposite of sea level rise is increasing desertification and aridification. If you take a look around the world, you can see the beautifully colored yellow and brownish colors. Those are the regions that are drying out. And you can see in the US, right where we are here today, you can see across Northern Africa, huge swaths of Asia, almost all of Australia. Think about how many professors, librarians, students live and work in those areas right now and what they'll have to do next. Those are all primary, immediate impacts. Think too about the second order impacts. Once global warming does its stuff, once temperatures increase and we have all the knock-on effects throughout the Earth system, then think about what that does to animals and plants as they move, as they change, as they die, as they mutate and they adapt. All of those have interesting impacts on colleges and universities. Literally, our landscapes will change. Different trees, different plants will be able to grow or not be able to grow. And that applies as well to all the areas around it. Where's Noah? I think I saw him before. Noah, can I mention your project to people? Noah's talking about planting seeds in order to bring more plants to different areas. It's harder to do that when the climate is literally changed. Good project, Noah. Good luck on this. Think as well, yes. Think as well about what happens to diseases. And we've already seen this in the northeast of the US, where Lyme disease has really spread because global warming has driven the deer tick population to new areas. So another great effect. We should expect a climate-driven pandemic at some point. All of this impacts higher education. And on the third level, what we do in response then impacts colleges and universities. I mean, here's just a few things to think about. What happens to different government policies, ranging from your city policy to the federal government? What happens to ideologies? What happens to businesses? What decisions consumers make? Think about changes in religion, right? Right now in the US, the Catholic faith is kind of divided, where we have a pope who is urging climate activism. Then you have very conservative Catholics who are saying, no, we shouldn't do anything about this. Think about denial actions, what people who deny climate change or just don't want to have anything to do with it, what they might be doing. And then ultimately building up to the question of how do we see this as a sea change in how we live and work, or as a revolution? Let me break this down a little more carefully. And this terrifyingly gray chart is also a breakdown of the chapters in this book. The more I looked at the intersection of climate and academia, the more complicated it became. And one of the ways you can think through this is by breaking things down into the impact zones. And one of them is the physical campus. Another one is research. A third is teaching. A fourth is community relations. And a fifth puts academia in contact with the whole world. So if you think about what happens to a campus, I already mentioned the specter of flooding before. In fact, the US Naval Academy just started building a wall to protect it from flooding, which sounds kind of ironic, but appropriately, the Naval Academy is actually on water. It kind of makes sense for a Naval Academy. And they're in danger of seeing their library get flooded. So they started building a wall to protect them. But think as well about buildings. Your library is a net zero building, which is fantastic. It's the biggest net zero library in the US, fantastic. Any librarians here? No librarians means a sad, sad place. But we need to think about all the different buildings that are historical, that need to be rebuilt or renovated. Think as well about trying to be carbon negative, about trying to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. Think as well about your power supplies. When I go to different colleges, I ask people, where do you get your electricity? And they say, well, this wall is, no, beyond the wall. Where? Well, we don't know. Well, all campuses, except for a couple, outsource their electrical power. The one big exception is UT Austin, which actually has their own power plant on campus because Texas. But otherwise, you offshore your electrical power, where does it come from? And if you discover that it's coming from a plant that's burning coal or burning natural gas, how do you resource that? Berea College in Kentucky just basically licensed chunks of 2 hydropower plants down the road. So now they're renewably powered. Think about transportation on campus. I mean, I walked here today, and as I was walking, I saw all kinds of vehicles. Does your campus start to perhaps disincentivize people from showing up on your grounds driving a fossil fuel burning car? Or do you ban them completely? And IT department, hello, and this is shout out to the IT department who is making all this possible. You guys are great. Not to mention the AV people who are making all this work. Hello, keep doing the fantastic work. But do you have more IT on campus because you're doing less travel, because air travel burns up so much CO2? Or do you have less IT on campus because some computation is so intense, it uses so much CO2? And think about the food that's being served. How many campuses love serving steak and cheese and dairy and all kinds of animal products? Do we see a change towards more plant-based diets? And then, do you move? Do you move a campus when it's not a safe place anymore? How many of you have been to Las Vegas? Arguably, that's a city which might not have a good justification for continuing to exist. You have to think about it, how much you have to bring to it to make it to work, how much water to bring in, how much electricity. When you start air conditioning the outside, maybe that's a sign that there's something that maybe shouldn't be there. Around Las Vegas is a huge community college system. Do they have to start thinking about moving? Now, the research enterprise is a little different. You have to think about right now who gets to research it. So just quick show of hands. How many of you are majoring in the sciences? All right. How many of you are majoring in the social sciences, like psych and sociology? Okay. And how many humanities people? Okay, nice breakdown, very liberal arts. So we have all kinds of research being done in the natural sciences, obviously from chemistry to hydrology to physics to astronomy, trying to understand this, that makes complete sense. But also the social sciences are playing with this in different ways. You have, for example, people studying economics, trying to figure out how you finance climate reparations, people studying psychology, trying to understand what happens to the human mind when the climate you grew up with no longer exists. There's actually this interesting term called solastalgia, which is the kind of painful nostalgia you have for the climate that you once had and can never regain. Think about it in the humanities, those of you who raise your hands, trying to explain climate change to people requires people in the arts, people in journalism. We need all kinds of disciplines on board. And those of you who are doing multidisciplinary work, that's the cutting edge. In many ways, I think this may be the new liberal arts. On top of that, we have challenges. So one of the challenges is when you're doing research into new fields, how do you physically preserve these fields? On the island of Malta in the Mediterranean, there are some roughly 6,000-year-old megaliths that are amazing to look at. We don't quite know enough about them, how they work, what they were supposed to do, but to walk there is eerie. You're walking through what may have been a home or a religious site for people 6,000, 7,000 years ago. It's a stone's throw away from the Mediterranean Sea. So are they going to have to dig under this ancient site and raise it up in order to let the sea go under it? Are they going to have to build a container field around it in some way? Or do you just scan it three-dimensionally with lots of digital scans and assume at some point that the ocean is going to eat it? How do you research these things? Plus the political pressure. What happens if you're a researcher in philosophy trying to look at climate ethics and you get doxxed? Or you're a chemist. Where's Doré, the chemist? Hello. What if you're studying chemistry and you're looking at climate interaction, thinking, for example, about the longevity of methane in the atmosphere, and you get attacked politically? All of these are ways that colleges have to think about protecting their faculty and anyone else doing research. And then we have this problem, that when we fly, we burn a lot of CO2. And in the US, we have to fly a lot because our train network is very, very limited and because we love cars. So what if we fly less? Are we ready to do this in academia? The pandemic showed us we know how to do it. We know how to have virtual events. We know how to do them well. But will we actually fly less? And this doesn't just apply to faculty researchers. This applies to staff. This applies to students going on spring break or going home for a vacation. This applies to student athletes who may have to fly across the country to new places. What is it like if we fly less? It's tricky. We may have to invent new technologies for this to work. On the right, this is a device which I call a Doppelbot. It's basically a Segway with an iPad stuck on top. And it lets you do some telepresence, which is kind of interesting. Do we invent new technologies and use new technologies to make virtual meetings work better? Now, most of you here are students. and that means you're taking a lot of classes in these subjects. One thing we wonder is, just as the curriculum expand, do we get more and more classes either completely about climate change or just using climate change? I used to teach a class on the Romantic poets in British literature. Now, if I'm teaching that class, I will bring in an obscure Percy Shelley poem called The Revolt of Islam, because in the middle of that poem, he describes in amazing detail an ecological collapse. I mean, it's a textbook environmental studies passage, and it's in beautiful verse, right? Do we see more and more of this? And in fact, how do we support all of this? I'm thinking about students. How many of you 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 1 year from now, will come to campus having experienced some climate disaster, a flood, a fire, a storm? How do we honor that experience in the classroom without re-traumatizing you? And on top of that, how do we teach differently? Do we have more project-based learning, more inquiry-based learning, because those work really well for understanding complex systems? And the same for games and simulations, which are great tools for that. I gotta keep moving, but one last monetary point about this. We talk about green jobs, and there's actually different kinds of them. I mean, so one of them is new green jobs that may be available for new and emerging technologies, such as, for example, maintaining seawalls. We can also see new uses for old jobs. Right now, electrical engineers are in amazing demand across the country because we need to rewire so much of our electrical system. On top of that, when I talk to companies like Amazon, they say they want college grads who can help them with the climate change, the transition of their entire business. So how many colleges and universities are producing people who can do that? Now, I'm talking about this like we're all thinking on the same page, like all of academia is of one mind. That's never true. The only case which that's true for is nobody likes parking. But when it comes to higher education in general, we will have divides, we will have debates. At Harvard University this month, there is a professor of law who specializes in environmental law. Just found out that she also sits on the board of ConocoPhillips, which you might recognize because they're the ones who are going to start getting more oil out of Alaska, thanks to the Willow project that President Biden unfortunately supported. What do students think about the professor? Is she a contradictory person? Is she compromised? Think about your own campuses if you're doing enough. I mean, Colorado College is doing more than almost anybody, but look around the world. Think about students like this. You'll die of old age, we'll die of climate change. Do you think a student like that will be happy for a university to take 10 years to make a decision about a committee, about a policy? Or will they go on strike now? We've already had that happen in Spain. University of Barcelona students this past winter went on strike, get this, to compel the university to require climate change classes for all students. And they succeeded. They struck, they occupied the campus, and they won. Now, we can go a bit further still. Oop, hang on a second. Think about what happens beyond the walls of the campus, beyond the borders of a given college or university. How do we interact with the rest of the world? Do we work with local efforts, for example? One college that I talked to had a great plan to set apart a little bit of land right off campus, waste land used for almost nothing except occasional animal grazing, and they were going to cover it with solar panels. And they got the whole community on board until a small group in the community, very interested in oil, managed to block it completely. How many of those stories are going to be playing out around the world? Not just solar, right? But trying to do research, trying to help people. I mean, all kinds of town-gown relations can be there. Plus, we can go further still. If this is a global crisis that's transforming everything we know about civilization, what's your responsibility as academics, as students, faculty, or staff? Are you compelled to play a role in this world historical event? And if so, what does that mean? Do you change your campus? Do you go into the community to try and learn and help people? Do you change your career plans? And what does an academic researcher do? What does a staff person do? Should we be out there in the world lobbying governments, trying to negotiate with companies, trying to build a inter-campus network of climate-interested academics? All these questions are on the table now. That's why I mentioned all of these different levels. It's not a simple problem. There's a lot of different things going on. Now, you are fortunate to be at a liberal arts college. Liberal arts colleges are an American invention. They're very precious, they're very rare, and they punch way above their weight. So, what do you do differently about climate change than anybody else? How is the liberal arts world different from, say, community colleges or research universities? Here are a few thoughts. Liberal arts colleges tend to be more interdisciplinary than other people, which is pretty powerful. So, for example, if you want to take a look at the impact of the climate crisis on Denver, looking ahead 10 years, what are a couple of the academic disciplines you need to bring together for that? People are stymied, they don't know. I'll throw out one, meteorology. Right? Trying to figure out what's going to happen to the air currents, what's going to happen to precipitation. What's another discipline you want to bring in for that? Yeah, absolutely, sociology. How are people going to react in groups? Will there be a social movement? Yeah. What's another one? Oh, definitely architecture, right? Thinking about redesigning all these buildings, renovating them, making new buildings. Think about law, think about history. Who is in Southwest Studies? For example, thinking about the unique nature of this part of the world. So inherently, you are in a great spot for that. Plus, liberal arts colleges are hyper committed to supporting students, both in caring and supporting for UL, but also for helping you follow your passions and your curiosity. And again, that may lead to better and better teaching on climate. We're also small. President Richardson, you have 2,000 students? If you go around the world, people think that's a vanishingly small population. If you go to Australia, they complain that there's 60,000 student universities, a bit on the small side. We have these small colleges which can then turn really fast. So we have the capability of being hyper flexible. And we also have the heritage of activism. Some of our schools are very, very active. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with having to make some decisions. And I want to wrap this up quickly because I want to hear more of your thoughts. Every futurist, every consultant has to have a quadrant diagram. Apparently it's a law. And I made one of these that was 5-sided and it started looking too sinister, so I had to stop. But when you think about what your campus is going to do, and by campus, I might mean this could be your program, this could be your department, it could be your major, it could be your building. We think at the top of the quadrant, you might want to just preserve what you have because it's good. You love your biology department, you love your dorm, you love Colorado College, and you want to preserve it against all the changes that are happening. That's a conserving point of view. I don't mean politically conservative like Trump, I just mean you want to protect something for the future. Maybe on the left, instead you're willing to be a bit more flexible and you want to adapt to a changing world. I was telling some students last night, what I hear now from some conservative Republicans is they don't think humanity is causing the climate crisis, but they think it's happening. So they're willing to adapt to changes, but they're not willing to take responsibility for causing it. Okay, they're halfway there, right? They're making progress, right? But maybe you want to adapt. Maybe you want to go further. Maybe you want to mitigate this. Maybe you want to take a larger role. Say, put direct air capture for carbon dioxide units on campus. Maybe you want to take a larger step still. Or maybe you want to migrate. You want to move to a better location. I made you all sad by talking about the end of Las Vegas, but think back to that map of Florida. Whatever we think of Florida being a kind of nightmarish political hellscape, that's an analytical term. Or if you think about Florida just being entertaining, like the great crime spree of Florida man, that kind of thing. If the whole state goes underwater, that's a mass migration of, among other things, academics having to relocate. Or you might migrate online. Because if you think that online, students taking classes, faculty teaching, staff supporting it, happens without travel, that might be the best place. It also depends on how seriously we take this. And right now, the US is not really as serious as anywhere near it needs to be. I mentioned the Willow Project as one example. We're a lot more excited about climate change than we were before, but still it's taking time. Still we're behind. So we might just see this as an operational problem. You know, what do you do if you're living on the west coast of Europe and you're worried about floods from the Atlantic Ocean? Okay, you figure out how to protect. Operational challenge. Maybe you want to pay attention to emerging intellectual currents. For example, how many of you are business or economics majors? So the hands just went up like this, like, yeah, I am, please don't hurt me. It's okay, you're among friends. I read economics for fun, clearly I need a life, but you know, economics and business, you think, for example, about maybe the current system we have for managing the global economy is not good. Maybe it's too focused on the bottom line. Maybe we need to change things in terms of, say, donut economics or degrowth or no growth economics, or do something entirely different. These are all intellectual ideas that can swarm across our campuses. Students can be interested, faculty and staff. Maybe that's how we greet this, as a huge transformation of the mind. Okay. Maybe we do this because you all are interested. Maybe we do more about climate because students are interested in that. That's a legitimate response. Or we think of this as an epochal, global historical crisis on the scale of, say, World War II or the Civil War in the United States, in which case we need to mobilize against it. This is the choice that we have to make in higher education. That sounds grim, and I'm always afraid of being too dour. So let me make sure that you know one powerful force that you have on your side, and that is the human imagination. We have a tremendous capacity for inventing new stuff. That's what human history teaches us. That's what human society teaches us. We can invent stuff you wish you'd never seen before. You know, you can take a look at Jersey Shore and think, I didn't need that. We're done, we're done. For me, the Twilight vampire books, no, forget it, wrong, yeah. But we keep coming up with new innovations. Right now, solar power is cheaper than oil and gas. It wasn't 10 years ago. That's remarkable, right? Think about all the innovations that are happening with electric cars for a start, right? We have a lot of innovation. So I turn to the idea of solar punk. This is a design school which wants to imagine a positive Anthropocene. And I asked a couple of AI programs to imagine what a solar punk university might look like. And here's one with lots of green and lots of solar cells. Here's another one where you can see buildings. Now, of course, this is warped, it's AI vision, but you can see that all the campus is just covered in greenery. Here's a drawing by an artist who goes by the nickname Imperial Boy. And just take a look at this city. Water running through it. See all the plants that are in horizontal locations as well as vertical locations. Think of the way all the surfaces are designed to be green and viridian. Think of all that imagination. You all have access to that. You can see us forward. You can look ahead and take us into a better world. That's where I want to pause for right now. I want to take your questions. And I want to hear your comments, and I want to hear your hopes and your thoughts. And once we're done with that, I'm going to stomp around the front and start signing copies of books. But let me hear your thoughts and questions. And if you don't have any, I'll ask you. There are a couple of microphones here. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, woman with a hat.
Woman with a hat. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering about timescale, and that is the question.
Tell us first who you are and what you do here.
I'm Star. I'm a fourth-year history philosophy major.
Oh, what kind of philosophy?
A lot of continental 20th century European stuff, a lot of decolonial stuff. I'm really
excellent.
interested in intellectual history. So
Oh, very good.
Of course, I like your talk because I like everything.
Well, thank you. I didn't get a chance to talk
about
about Heidegger and Earth, which is what I was coming up to. But
worlding of the world, you know.
yes.
We can get there.
So, and tell us your name again. I'm sorry.
Star.
Star?
Yeah.
So, a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is not good. Because we've known about this problem since the 70s. I mean, arguably the first science in this dates back to the 19th century. And we have done, I think the technical term from political science is diddly squat. There's a fun movie, I mean, fun in a kind of grim way, which purports to be a documentary from the year 2100, looking back at the world destroyed by climate change. They try and explain what happened. They say, well, around 1990 began the age of stupid. And that's what we're coping with. That's the name of the movie. We're way behind, and the time scale is bad. The IPCC was talking about the 2020s being the years for action, and we're not doing nearly enough. And then higher education. You all here, Colorado College, are an exception. Most colleges are not doing this. I was telling President Richardson, I was talking to the president of another university, and she told me her students weren't interested in climate. I said, what are they interested in? She said, bigger trucks. I said, okay. I said, so are you going to become an anti-climate university? She said, no. I think she's going to be. This is incredibly urgent. That's why I call this book Universities on Fire, because it is that urgent right now, and we have to act. Did you see, what was the group last year that was throwing food at European artworks? It wasn't Extinction Rebellion, it was, I'm sorry? Just Stop Oil, thank you. And a lot of them are college students. This is just the beginning. I think there's a lot more possibility here. And I think the 1960s might look like the 1950s by the time we're done. Thank you for asking, Star. And good luck with your studies.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Who are you and what do you study here?
My name is Asir. I'm a master's student. I'm getting the master's in teaching.
Excellent.
Thank you. In undergrad, I wrote part of my thesis was on moving to the green zone for climate change. So I'm very interested in your work.
Very good.
What was I gonna say? Oh, inequitable social conditions place people least responsible for the climate crisis at the greatest risk of its effects. Is it possible to address climate change separate from other social inequities?
No, this is a great question, and thank you for asking. And this is something I write about throughout the book, because we know right now pretty extensively that the people who did the least to cause a climate crisis are generally speaking suffering worse. The people who did the most to cause it are basically suffering not at all. And we know that in general, a lot of the procedures that we use, a lot of the mechanisms for industrial civilization tend to really exact a terrible toll on people who are marginalized around the world, marginalized by geography, by race, by religion, by gender. The IPCC reports keep saying that we have to do this with social justice at the same time. And I think that's the only way forward. Otherwise, this is just going to repeat and recapitulate terrible historical patterns. And I think now, higher education is in a great frame for that, because ever since 2020, we've been very keen on social justice. And hopefully we can keep that in mind as we look at climate. But those are two huge ideas, and it takes a bit of intellectual work. And as an educator, that's going to be one of your jobs, I think, is to help students frame these two vast subjects together and then to do something about it. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Hello.
So I have a question about so with climate change, it's affecting many different groups of people all across the world. So why did you choose specifically like higher education for like who's specifically being impacted and how it affects them?
Oh, good question. Thank you for asking. Are you Noah?
Yeah.
Okay, light's different right now. Like you're like a gleaming thing of light right now. I'm like, you all see him, right? Because for the past roughly 30 years, I've been working on the future of education, specifically higher education, because K through 12, I've worked in K through 12, it's a different field in many ways. I follow it closely, but it's not the same. And I'm really passionate about where colleges and universities can go, and I'm really concerned about our fate and how many problems we have. So I've been working on that using all kinds of analytical tools, looking at everything from demographics to economics to technology to policy to changes in consumer behavior, I mean, all of that. So that's what I've been working on for a long time, and I still do that. I do a monthly trends analysis just on the future of higher education. I do a weekly video discussion about the future of higher education, and we focus all on that. That's where I start from. And then when I look at higher education, I think, okay, colleges and universities, maybe that's just an outlier in the world, but there are 20,000 universities in the world. We educate millions of people. We have we're a big chunk of the planet. Plus, we have the capacity to change so much. If you look at the IPCC reports, a lot of that science comes from us. I mean, if you think about also, we can be exemplars. We can invent new things. We can invent new technologies and new practices. Plus, You're going to be teaching people. We're all teaching people. That's a whole generation to come that we can influence and try and help us through the Anthropocene. I think we have a tremendous capacity to make this better if we choose to do so. You were asking a biographical question. I gave you a speech. I'm sorry. Good question. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, another person with a lot of hair.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, yeah. I'm missing on the beard, though.
Oh,
so
there's time. There's time, sir.
Yeah, I hope it's going to come. So thank you so much for coming all the way here and giving this
My pleasure.
very, very good presentation. I was wondering throughout your presentation about, so my name is Filip. I come from Slovakia, and I'm an environmental science major in my 4th year. So enjoying one of my first Monday talks. And I was thinking about this throughout your presentation because I feel a little conflicted being at CC. I come from a whole different place and studied abroad in whole different places. And this is the place that is by far the least sustainable in which I lived. And yet it is a place that talks about sustainability the most. And it feels very disempowering almost, you know, to see that this is a leader in the US. And I understand that a lot of that is because, as you said, US is so behind in this whole fight. But I've been here for 4 years, and I also see, and I want to applaud CC for doing so much. Of course, they have cut on water usage and so many things. But I was like, I don't know, like it took me 1 month to get my composting bucket. It took me we go to spring breaks to Europe and whatever. We still buy carbon offsets to be sustainable. And like, so there's still so many like fundamental things that make us much like more status quo than really the leaders that we pose ourselves to be. So I just wonder, like you speaking to these universities and so on, like what would you say on that? Like I kind of feel like it's a little too slow, this big change.
It is. I'm blanking your name with the hat, because you asked about the timeline. Star, thank you. Sorry. Star was talking about the timeline, and I was talking about how we are too late. In many ways, that's one of the huge problems I see right now. And I hope that higher education will have the energy to turn on this. But there's a lot of resistance and from all kinds of levels. And I've written about some of them. Faculty who say, I don't have time for this. I'm busy doing everything else. Students who say, I'm trying to get a job. And I don't have time for this. Also a feeling that there's no traction. There's nothing we can do. And if we can't get a compost bucket in enough time, then you feel bad. I actually compost. I have a wooden framework that I build every year just to make it work. That takes time, right? I think we're in the middle of a gigantic civilization kind of awakening or enlightenment about this. And the time scale will happen quickly and it will happen slowly. And we may go backwards at times. If we have a year without a lot of spectacular crises, you know, if the Western water supply doesn't dry up, if we don't have a hurricane knocking out a city, we might slide back. And we can have failures. We can choose bad technologies, like plant-based fuels for cars, for example, which is a dumb idea. But I think I remain optimistic. But as a futurist, I have to look at all possibilities. So in the book, there's a chapter called Best Case and Worst Case Scenarios. And the worst case scenario is the scariest thing I've ever written. And the best case is a little bit better. Slovakia, don't you still have the coal plants that you share with I'm trying to remember how this works out, because I know there was a problem with a whole coal field in the Polish border, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of Middle European politics to go through for this.
Yeah. We also have mostly nuclear, which is also not great, but yeah.
Well, good luck. And by the way, congratulations on your impending degree.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
It's gonna happen.
Is it a quick picture of all of you here? I'm conscious of time. I want to hear.
We'll take one more question, and
question.
then we invite you all to join Bryan in the lobby.
Hello. Last
Hello.
question.
Yes, thank you for giving me this chance to ask this question. My question is, how viable would a greater focus on promoting nuclear engineering and other forms of engineering related to the generation of natural energy as majors within colleges and universities in order to add more people to our country's workforce capable of building more natural energy sources be?
Well, I think we have a lot of capacity for that, and this can really be done. You started off with nuclear, and nuclear is extremely contentious. Let me just put that to one side for 1 second.
Of course.
We have a lot of work done on other fields. I mean, we know right now solar and wind. We know how they work. We've got great technologies for that. We can really rebuild our energy basis on that. We can proceed. Plus, we have geothermal, which can work pretty well depending on where it is. It's still a bit too expensive, but if you're in a good spot like Iceland, it can be really terrific. Plus, we have other tools that we're looking at, some tidal power, for example, and of course, hydro. I mean, hydro is kind of maxed out in North America right now, but we can do more and we can have it better than that. Plus, inventing new technologies and new engineering tools is something which people are investing in, and I think academia has a key role to play in that. Nuclear is weird because we have a huge civilizational dread about it. Fukushima most recently is a sign of that, and we've seen some interesting backsliding. In Germany, for example, their decision to just end nuclear power looks pretty stupid right now, but they made the decision. And a lot of people are very frightened about it. I think personally, it has huge potential and we should consider it as one of our tools, but that's a controversial view, I know. I think engineering schools, as well as everything around engineering, have a huge capacity to really innovate in this field. And tell me your name and what you study.
My name is Denton Angworth. I am hoping to study computer science at Colorado College.
Excellent. Good luck. Nice to meet you, Denton.
Thank you. I'm going to need it.
You're in a good spot.
Right,
let me get
you're fine.
Okay.
First, I want you all to thank Bryan for spending some time with us and giving us this fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. Second, I want to invite you all out, as we've mentioned. If you don't have a copy of Bryan's book, please get one, bring it by quickly, get it signed. I know he's happy to continue to engage with you all out in the lobby. Thank you and have a wonderful Block 7.